Hey guys, welcome back. BDCKR here. We're back with our weekly Q&A video, and we're going to be talking more about political stuff here. So again, you can look out for a link in the description if you want to skip stuff. I'm out of order because I'm excited to get to the thing that I'm about to get to, which is we're doing a giveaway. But also, if you're on the YouTube video, you can check out links in the description to access this on all the major podcasting platforms. What I was about to say is, hopefully in the comments we'll have Daniel O with timestamps if you want to skip the political stuff, but you probably want to listen to the next few minutes, because what we've done this week is we've taken the amount that is worth 1 month of YouTube ad revenue.
All of it.
Yeah. And we've spent all that money and put it towards the bundle for racial justice and equality, which itch.io hosted. So it's donating that money to charity, but what that also lets us do is give away a bunch of bundles, each with like 1,500 items and more than 1,000 games in them. So just a ridiculous amount of stuff. So the way that we did it is we bought 9 copies of the bundle. So we're going to do... we wanted to try to figure out a way to both let everybody participate, but also to give some preference to people who wanted to donate or had already donated. So to causes related to LGBTQ and trans rights, especially to any black rights, bail funds,
police brutality.
Left-wing reporting. So like Unicorn Riot would be acceptable too. Right. Who do a lot of the investigative reporting, anything basically related to Black Lives Matter or any of the current intersectional causes with everything happening right now in the world. So what we're gonna do is every single one of our patrons has already directly or indirectly donated. So we've got 3 copies of the bundle that we've sort of reserved for our patrons.
As a random draw.
Yeah, as a random draw for anybody who wants it. We have 3 copies that we're going to be giving out with preference to people who give us any proof of donation. It doesn't have to be after this video comes out. You don't need to have donated because of us, but just anybody who's donated anytime recently to any sort of related causes.
Right.
We will be doing 3, and then there's going to be 3 based off of just anybody randomly, where those ones are going to be accessible to everyone, which isn't to say that the people, if there's more than 3 people who've donated, they, maybe 4 people who donate will win them. It's just that, the donation copies are only for people who've donated. So how this is going to work.
We were assuming that there's going to be at least 3. Yeah. If there's less than 3, then
they'll trickle down.
Yeah, we'll have to set a time limit, and then they will trickle down. Probably, but next week. I think
next week's video.
Yeah.
And so how this is going to work is if you look at the description right now, there will be updates on how many we've given away to make sure that it's still open. And all we need from you is some way to contact you. So if you want to, you can drop your email in the YouTube comments, but we recommend you contact us directly by email at bdckr@hotmail.com. And if you are somebody who's donated recently, you can attach proof of donation, which is a screenshot of your donation, a picture of a receipt for a donation with whatever personal details you want edited out. Just all that needs to be clear is the charity name. You can also black out the amount number. It doesn't matter if it's $1 or a cent, right? Anybody contributing whatever we can, right? We know everybody's in a different financial situation, so send us an email with a picture if that's if you're applying for this sort of donation category for the giveaway. Drop us an email or a comment with your email in it, although we recommend not just putting your email on random YouTube videos, so it's probably best to email us directly, although you can do that if you really want to. Yeah. And for our patrons, you can either do the email, the comment with the email, or we'll be putting up a post on our Patreon that's locked to patrons, and if you reply to that post, that will also be a way to enter, because we can just give you the link straight through Patreon.
Right.
So yeah, 9 copies. We'll have them probably given away by next week at the latest, by the time next video goes up, but we will have sort of a how many copies of each thing have been given out in the description too. So there we go. That's just something that we give back, and that's a way that we can donate. Unfortunately, the giveaway, or not the giveaway, the bundle has already finished. So you can't buy a copy of the bundle if you want it.
I did not know that.
Yeah, because it was going on last week.
Right.
By the time I had the idea for it, last week's video had already come out. So it closed yesterday, I think.
Oh, okay.
So we're not going to be pushing any new people towards buying the bundle. But yeah, hopefully this
Also,
will...
maybe it's got better value than what the original price was then.
Yeah. But so there we go. That's our sort of donation for this week, and also something to give to you guys.
Yep.
And I do want to be clear, right? For anybody who hears about that, wants it, like, you don't necessarily expect winning a bundle for sure from this giveaway if you donate. So if any money that you donate, you have to be willing to donate separately from whether or not you win.
Sure.
Right? It does give you a better chance to win one of the bundles, and that would be cool if people donated, for this purpose. But it also doesn't guarantee you get anything, so I don't want anybody being disappointed if they throw a couple bucks in and think that, they feel gypped when they don't get their copy, because it is a good cause.
Yes.
So there we go. That's what's going on.
And I also wanted to, since we were talking about things that came to us last week, I wanted to point out, I didn't actually quite finish my point. We got distracted. The point I was making about the NFL and the 3 acts, and how they started off by blackballing Kaepernick, and then coming out with something in support. And then when they got called on being tone deaf, the 3rd act was Roger Goodell doing his own little video from home. And this was what he said. He said, "We, the NFL, condemn racism and the systematic oppression of black people. We, the NFL, admit we were wrong for not listening to NFL players earlier and encourage all to speak out and peacefully protest. We, the NFL, believe Black Lives Matter." Definitely a huge change.
Yeah.
Mentioning specifically Black Lives Matter, which he's never done before, and acknowledging it, still a bit short if he doesn't address the fact that, I mean, he probably doesn't want to get sued, but it doesn't address the fact that Kaepernick lost his livelihood because the NFL were kind of crappy about it.
Yeah.
So, anyways, that was the point. I never finished off, but that was the thought, and how we're seeing the evolution in a lot of different places that I never would have expected.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
There's still a lot of people who have very sort of milquetoast responses that are...
They're responding because they're forced to.
Yeah, and you can tell that they are very studiously not saying anything specific, but really just sort of signaling. Like that, if the term virtue signaling hadn't been so mired in
co-opted
poor use, this would be, a great time to use it, because a lot of companies are actually virtue signaling in sort of the truest sense, not in like that right wing, you're not allowed to unironically believe things.
Okay, but this is the interesting thing, right? So it's an actual, it feels like a rhetorical tactic where things that you believe, you accuse the other side of doing first, so that it loses its bite when you actually do the same thing yourself.
Yeah.
Because the idea of virtue signaling, when you use it to accuse people of individuals of being, of faking concern or empathy, it's, in most cases, it's more obvious that they're actually lacking. The person who's accusing you is lacking it because they can't somehow understand.
You're not even, the person that's accusing them isn't even faking it in the first place.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So, yeah, no, it is. It's like a lot of other terms too, right? Like social justice warrior. To me, when I first heard that term, that's a good thing to be.
Yeah.
And I think this is one of those things that
it's the connotation of self-importance, I think, is the only part of it that's actually sort of negative.
Well, but that's been created. I mean, that's one of the words that's been co-opted, I think, that you can actually reclaim. Because I wouldn't be embarrassed or ashamed about being called a social justice warrior.
Yeah.
I actually wouldn't mind that. Warrior is kind of cool.
Yeah, and I think that's part of the thing that people sort of, they put emphasis on the warrior, like there's being like, oh, you think you're like, fighting in some like important like struggle, right? And I think that's sort of the thing that they were initially making fun of, at least in part.
Right. But yeah, anyways, I think it's weird how the discourse has evolved in so many funky
There's a lot of
ways.
words. There's a lot of words that are becoming less acceptable to say that have no negative connotations, like the word boogaloo.
Right. Yeah. I remember Electric Boogaloo. I watched that in the theaters.
It was
way
terrible.
back when. It wasn't that terrible. I mean, okay, so my aesthetic for movies had not properly developed, but there was some really cool at least I remember, I haven't seen it in years, there were some really cool breakdancing scenes in that.
Yeah, and now the Civil War people in the U.S.
Anyways, all right, so let's get to our first question, which is actually about injustice.
Yeah, so there we go. Our first question comes
the game Injustice, not injustice in the concept.
That's true, and I think we'll get back to the political stuff closer to the end. But our first question comes from Johnny Sins, and they say, on your Flashpoint team, what are your thoughts on replacing the Quake engine with the Enchantress companion card on Aquaman? When paired with the COH, each skull has a 75% chance of shattering, that's Claw of Horus, of shattering gear, which means it has 4 chances to trigger, 3 skulls plus special 1 hit. Most of the time it shatters all 3 gear pieces, and rarely just 2. The Quake engine, on the other hand, is pretty weak unless the character is a damage over time specialist, which Aquaman isn't geared to be, making it not all that necessary.
Alright, so I want to address the last point first. Aquaman is inherently a damage over time specialist because his special 1 causes bleed damage. Bleed damage I will hold till the day I stop playing Injustice is the best damage over time because
it boosts all damage, all other incoming damage.
And it stacks. It stacks itself. So if you stack 3 bleeds, 3 special 1s fast enough on one character, Aquaman, it stacks to, it's like 20% each, so you do an extra 60% damage.
Yeah.
Quake engine will boost it another 50% if they have less than 1 bar of power. And if they get knocked out,
it hits their next guy as long as the timing is right.
Triple again, same thing. So this is absolutely brilliant because then it not only is great for doing the amount of damage over time that you need for Phantasm tasks, but the number of actual damage over time effects is boosted too. So I think to me, Aquaman, at least both of the versions of Aquaman that we use, both Flashpoint Aquaman and Injustice 2 Aquaman, which you're seeing right now, and Injustice 2 Aquaman, even better, is if he can redouble any damage over time he's taken. Absolutely brilliant. So replacing the Quake engine with the Enchantress companion card. Okay, so I actually had to test this. It would be great if it worked like Johnny Sins said, that each skull individually has another chance of shattering gear. Problem is, I tested it. It didn't work like that. It still felt, the small sample set, admittedly, it still didn't shatter gear about a quarter of the time. It never shattered more than 1 gear. And it wasn't that useful. So there are plenty of times where I would have noticed, because what I'm looking for is, let's say you've got the 4th world gear set.
Like for it not reviving anymore.
Right. So the ones that have grouped abilities. And the animation to show that gear shatters. Yeah. At most it happens once.
Yeah, so that's interesting. I wonder what Johnny Sin's experience has been with it for them to think that it shatters, 2 to 3 consistently.
Yeah, no, I would love to see that too. So Johnny Sins, that's, I guess, is that a challenge? If you've got some video, we would love to see it. Upload it on your YouTube channel. I mean,
everybody's because if it worked that way, that would be great.
Yeah, I would love to, because it would be totally, that would be like a next level up. It's one of those, when you make when you come to realization, something that you can actually exploit like that in a fight.
Yeah, we'd love to be wrong, but it doesn't look like it works.
Yeah.
So there we go. I think that's both parts of the question.
Yep.
Our next question comes from Snickety Lemon, and they say, "Hey, I'm not sure if you saw this in the comments of your last vid, but thanks so much for raising awareness about Black Lives Matter. Also, what do you think is the best way to farm gear shards? My guess would be to max out Ra's al Ghul's Scimitar, and then use the refund glitch to open gear locker packs to keep getting more to shatter. Does this seem the most efficient?"
I think when you have to use the refund glitch, it becomes less efficient. And there's 2 ways you can think about this, right?
Yeah.
Either you can have the really good gear, so that if you get 1 copy, it shatters and gives you a huge bunch of it. Or you have the really lower star gear. Oh, I should say, even before that, the thing that the underlying assumption I'm working with, or the piece of information I've got that may not be obvious, is when you take a piece of gear, whether it's 1.5, 2.5, 3.5, or 4.5 star gears, if you've maxed it out, when you shatter your extra copies,
it gives you more.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
More gear shards. And this was not true originally when they first introduced gears and you shattered it. It didn't matter how many copies you had. Didn't matter how far you promoted it. And it would give you a really dinky amount.
Yeah, so I think what probably makes sense is some refund glitch might work, where if you buy a low number and you wait to get a high enough gear so that you can get purples, right?
Yeah,
so
if you want purples, right, for the
upgrade it,
right,
and then also trying to get those. The problem is they're so much more expensive to upgrade the higher level gear, so it probably makes sense to get some purples enough so that you can actually evolve the gear, and then after that, I would say, yeah, go for the cheap ones, go for whatever you get, and actually focus on upgrading them first, because you'll get some returns, and then when you actually start shattering them, you'll be getting them way more often, and you won't need to do the refund glitch very much at all. And since they are the cheapest to upgrade, then you end up with maxed out gears to shatter faster.
And they're the most common.
Yeah.
You're more likely to get them if you buy the gear locker. So I've seen the argument made that maybe Survivor is the best. Here's the thing, though. With the lack of any power credit team packs, when they took away the Femme Fatale pack, and the Arkham pack, and they replaced them with other cash money packs, all of a sudden there was a lot fewer things to spend your power credits on.
Yeah.
So the fact that the gear lockers take power credits, and the gear lockers most often give you the common gears, and even in the cases when you're, I guess depending on what you're aiming for, when you're lucky and you get the 3.5 star gears, there's so many different 3.5 star gears, like 30 something or more. No, sorry, that's the 4.5 star gears. That's not in the gear locker. I can't remember what I'm thinking, but I think it's somewhere around the order of 30. You're unlikely to get duplicates.
Yeah.
And what goes to what you're saying was that the 3.5 star gears take so much resource to fully max them out that if you are lucky enough to get a 3.5 star gear, there's a good chance it won't be one of the ones that you've maxed out unless you're really far along anyways. I mean, if you're really far along anyways, clearly it doesn't matter to you.
Because specifically using the reset glitch until you get Razagul Scimitar, I think takes you, like, I don't know exactly how long it would take you, but my intuition is if you're only buying a very low number of packs, it would take you a ridiculous amount of time, and you'd probably be better off just playing and earning more credits to buy more packs.
Yeah.
And then you'd at least be making consistent progress and instead of spending time basically rolling dice over and over again.
I'd say if you grind bonus battle 6 if you can. Grind the challenge. Bonus battle 6 if you need characters to have more experience.
Yeah.
Challenge reset if you don't care about promoting or advancing any of your characters, right?
Yeah, but you want a breadth of gold characters.
Yeah, because the challenge is actually a better and faster way of grinding credits as long as you reset it, and you're not going at too high a difficulty. So I think probably the problem with Survivor is that the number of shards that you get is still pretty low. Survivor is good because you're doing other things like getting last laugh tickets and potentially getting crit chance and crit damage augmentations,
and then
as
every
well
once
as
in a while getting gear.
Yeah. So I think that's not a bad
shards
balance.
too.
Yes, exactly. That's what I'm saying. It's not a bad balance, right? So you're doing other stuff, but if you're really aiming just for shards, I think
whatever method of grinding that is most fun to you.
Yeah.
And you'll obviously be getting credits, no matter what you do, pretty much.
Yeah.
So
that's why to me that using the refund glitch isn't so much grinding as it is spending a bunch of time doing something that has not a lot to do with advancing in the game.
Yeah, if it's grinding, it's a worse type of grinding than regular.
Right.
So there we go. And we also had the next question from Noah Guzman that we might as well
We've just answered.
Now. Yeah.
Don't you feel like it's when you're writing a test and you've already done it?
Yeah, and you over-explain one question and the next question is like part B and you already explained it in part A. Yeah, so it's what tips do you have on getting shards fast, which is, our tips is, what we just said.
Power credits.
Yeah,
gear lockers.
Power credits,
Survivor.
Gear lockers, upgrade your low star, and then shatter those, and you'll end up with a huge amount of shards. Yeah. Way earlier than I think you would if you did the reset.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, we've done a bunch of injustice stuff. Can I get a little political now?
Let's get political.
All right, so I think what's interesting is that the idea that defunding the police has gotten such traction.
Yeah.
And I think the one thing that I would like to see more of, that it's missing, is integrating a whole bunch of different ideas. Because defunding the police is one thing, right? So let's get the easy part out of the way. People can intentionally misunderstand the idea of defunding police as saying just abolish. Well, some people are saying that, but a lot of it is really that for a municipal service that has spent years and years increasing their budget and increasing the number of people, at some point, what you want to do is maybe rethink whether you need all these people doing all these jobs that they weren't necessarily trained to do.
Yeah, and so, there's a lot of discussion about the ways that issues have been institutionalized, right? And how the police force is sort of inherently flawed. And so when you say, defund the police or even abolish the police, nobody's saying we should... I'm
not have any peace officers.
I'm not saying nobody. Some people actually are. Yeah. But there is almost nobody who is saying that it should just be left in the hands of the community, right? Other than, anarchists.
Right.
Everybody wants there to be other things. And people are all saying different things, but I think the reason why defund the police has been the sort of rallying cry for all of them is because they all want, when it comes down to it, essentially the same thing, right? Whether it is officially through the government, or even if you look at what the anarchists want, it's like through community, what it is you want to replace it so that everything that doesn't need a police officer doesn't get one.
Right.
So there's like a lot of mental health calls.
Even the basic part, like I've seen people making comments to say, so what if something gets stolen? Well, if something gets stolen, you know what happens? Nothing. You call police, chances are it'll be hours before they come. They're not going to catch the people. What they'll want you to do is, what you'll need to do if you want your insurance to cover it, is make a report. Yeah. That's a paper pushing job. You don't need a police officer to do that. Let's have a notary public, right? They could take over that. Yeah. If, like you said earlier, you could, a mental health worker for dealing with people in distress. Mm-hmm. Traffic enforcement. I don't know that you need people with guns for that. Right? Yeah. Like, and so this is why it ties into a bunch of different ideas, because there's an underlying assumption coming from Canada. It's a little bit different. But one thing that's probably going to not be necessary, but make it more effective, is gun control. Mm-hmm. Because what you don't want is the people who are doing, when people are doing policing, they're not necessarily police, right? They're just, so people who are doing policing are in less danger if you don't have a whole lot of guns out there. Like, UK does that, right?
The only thing that you need police, or that you need people in who are very similar to what modern day police are when you're responding to violent situations, mm-hmm. in which somebody coming in externally who tries to de-escalate it is going to be in immediate physical danger. Right. In any situation where that is not the case, which is most of what the police do, right? When I do my vulnerable sector check so that people know that I don't have any criminal record, I don't need a police officer to handle that.
You just need somebody at the computer with a gun.
Yeah, but I go to the police station, and it is police officers who are handling it. There's a police officer at the front desk who I talk to, next to, and when I went in for my vulnerable sector check the last time I picked it up, somebody had like their car stolen, I think. Wow. And they were, or it was something where I was like, oh my god, it was pretty bad. And what the police was saying was basically, yeah, we're not going to catch them, but here's the forms that you need to fill out, right? Like, nothing's going to happen, but here's the forms that you need to fill out. Right. And that's not uncommon. Like, I just happened to be in there, and I you know what, the more that I think about it, it wasn't car stolen. It might have been identity theft. It was something where I was like, wow, that's really sort of bad. It was either some sort of property theft or it was identity theft. It was one of the two. Right. And they're like, yeah, I mean, we're not gonna catch him, but here's all the forms. Right. And it was also like a very terse interaction. Like, the police sounded very much not understanding and like frustrated that this person was in front of them, very upset that their stuff had been stolen, either their identity or their stuff. Again, I don't remember at this point. Right. And I don't think that's an uncommon interaction with the police, and obviously that's very anecdotal, but what people are asking for is a system that does not have all of the doesn't have all the baggage that the police does. And if you start from the ground up and look at what situation actually needs people like the police and what situations don't, you realize that a lot more of them don't, right?
And I'm going to apologize now. There's a point in the last question that I meant to make that I forgot, and it reminded me when we were watching the fight on the screen where the first player's Astro Harness. You might say Aquaman isn't great for damage over time, but if we face somebody with Astro Harness, we can build them up to 3 bars so that as soon as he tags in for the second guy after Wonder Woman's handled the first, you can totally, very frequently, stack 3 bleeds. 3 special ones. Sorry. So, yeah, all right, so that idea has been covered, but I figured a recap was good for the people who haven't been as familiar with the arguments that have been made. But I think tying in with that, so one thing that hasn't been talked about was gun control as a related issue. Another thing that hasn't been talked about is some of the bigger concepts that have already been making their way into the public consciousness, not related to this, but in a way that should be tied to this, is universal basic income. Mm-hmm. So if you give people meaning to life, options, something that they can do, they are much less likely to turn to crime. Yeah. So universal basic income means that fewer people are going to be desperate because fewer people are going to be thinking, where am I going to find my next meal? Yeah. How am I going to live? I'm desperate enough that I need to do something, and I have no other options.
I think like most crime boils down to, you know, a lot of it is necessity, right? A lot of it is a very sort of narrow band of mental health issues, unaddressed mental health issues, and then and just like lack of access to resources of various kinds, right?
Right.
At the end of the day, I think is most of it.
Right. Also related to defund police would be defunding the military. So people have made the argument that the military is really good. It's given poor people the option, excuse me, of finding a career, getting schooling paid for.
Yeah.
Why do we need to buy tanks and jets first before we pay for somebody's tuition? Why does it require them to commit how many years? Is it 4 years, 5 years? I have no idea. And why do people recruit at schools that are from poorer areas? It's because this is just what's been set up. There's this whole military apparatus that generates a huge amount of money for companies that produce weapons or somehow in other ways feed the military machine. And the reward is you get an education, which is great for the people who've done that. But why is it necessary to do all that other stuff? It would be so much more efficient
if you're just paying for people's education.
And then they would have options after that for finding a job.
Yeah.
So, yeah. Like you're saying, too, if we start from the ground up, there's at least a better chance that the kind of work that, to me, you can still call it all police, but a police force that has a small number that might do the kind of work that has the higher risk of violence, but then would also include other people that are not police that will do a lot of the clerical work, the community work, the communication, the social work that's necessary. I mean, you don't even have to call them police, right? Like, really, if you funded more social workers, I mean, you could actually, right? If that would satisfy people thinking that the organization should maintain its funding and have the manpower to handle all that, but it's not necessary.
And it's funny too because there's meaningful criticisms to be levied against different social worker structures, not like the individuals as much, right? But as a larger entity, I know a lot of people who have had, you know, mostly negative experiences with, you know, social worker systems, but it would be so much better than the police in a lot of the situations that the police are called out for. Right?
And I think a lot of the failures of the horror stories you hear about, say, Children's Aid, so for Americans, Children's Aid and Catholic Children's Aid in Ontario, maybe Canada, is very much, I think they call it Child Protective Services in the States.
Yeah.
That's the name for it. A lot of the problems are due to underfunding, where each caseworker has probably too many cases to manage that they can't handle properly, that they can't take care of properly.
Yeah. And, you know, I think a lot of people have been also, the one argument that I've seen a lot, which makes a lot of sense to me, is when people say, you know, defunding the police sounds like a big thing, but we're defunding the postal service, we're defunding education, we're
not.
Well, we're not, but
Americans
Americans are defunding postal service,
but they're,
education, public housing, roads, right? Like everything.
Okay, I want to point out that the postal service, it's not so much defunded as they got screwed.
As legislated into.
Yeah, because when I read this, it blew my mind that somehow a few years back that it was legislated that the postal service had to fully fund their pension commitment for the next 75 years. No company does
billions of dollars every year that they have to pay in.
Yeah, nobody does that, public or private sector. And if you want to cripple somebody, you take away some of the money so that they can't use any of it now.
Yeah.
And let's see what happens to your business for 75 years. This is a big part of the reason why I've read, at least, that foreign cars are so much more competitive than North American cars, because the Japanese, Korean companies coming in with cars don't have the same pension liability, so they can be a little bit more nimble. They have more money to spend. I don't know how true that is, but it boggles my mind that legislators would voluntarily cripple the postal service like that.
Yeah.
By really taking a huge amount of their cash flow out. So anyway, sorry. Yeah, and I guess to me, what we're seeing with these riots is just how poorly trained some of the police force are, where you've got people aiming rubber bullets at people instead of at the ground like they were designed to be.
Yeah.
Where you've got a line of officers shoving an old man and then walking past him, and they're waiting. Apparently, it's not a problem because somebody eventually gave him first aid, but that none of the first responders, you see my air quotes, first responders.
I see your air quotes. I don't think anybody else does.
Are just walking past them when they were the source of the problem.
Yeah.
And one question that has been sort of bugging me is that I wonder if this is going to be Rodney King again, where so there's a lot that was said, there's a lot that was done, but there wasn't really very much lasting change. And I think the answer's got to be no, because there's just so many more cameras. So that instead of 1 in 1,000 incidents being caught, right?
Yeah.
You get 1 in 100 incidents being caught, or 1 in 10. And I was having a discussion with one of our neighbors. I can't remember if I said this last time, right? But that
I don't think you did.
About the pandemic and the current the protests, and wondering if maybe the only reason that there's such a big turnout is because of the pandemic. And part of me thinks maybe not, because so sure, during the day a lot of people aren't working, they're available, they can go to the protests.
Yeah.
But the bigger ones are the ones that seem to be happening after curfew. And there's probably fewer people showing up to those because a large number of them that would have otherwise are not because of the pandemic.
Yeah.
So I think it balances out a little bit, and I think that you can't really take too much from thinking that these are, because of the situation we're in, that this is not an indication that people are more motivated. I think people are. And I think this is something that's going to change.
Yeah.
I think it feels like we're in a moment where there's going to be big change happening.
Yeah, and we just have to hope and keep the momentum going. I don't know. This is the first time I think I've seen in a very long time that it's not just groups talking about it, and it's not just on my radar, but it seems like literally everybody I know is talking about it.
Right.
Like every creator that I follow, almost without fail, has talked about it, and to the point where it is like necessary for it to be, at least something that everybody's addressing. Right. And I think I've never seen that before. I don't know if you've ever seen that before. We're literally like, there's no choice but to address it.
Yeah. No, I haven't seen it, but I've also not been involved the same way, right? Like, I mean, I led a relatively insulated life. I don't remember exactly what was happening in my circles with Rodney King.
But I think no matter how insulated a life that you're living right now, you've heard about it.
Oh yeah, for sure. Now, I'm just to your question about whether this is something that's ever happened like this before. I think.
But I'm saying if it happened on this scale, no matter how insulated a life you were living back then, you would have heard about it. You know what I mean? There would have been a thing that you definitely heard about.
Well,
and that everybody was talking about.
But this is why it's a little bit interesting too, because there wasn't social media like this. We got our news once a day, maybe twice a day if there's an afternoon edition, right?
Yeah.
Of the newspaper. So things didn't move so quickly. So it was easier to not be aware of the Rodney King stuff if you didn't watch a lot of TV, if you didn't read the newspapers. And it happened over there, hundreds of miles away.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I don't know if, I mean, maybe that by definition that means there's never been something like this because the necessary ingredients just weren't there, right? Like this is a time where communication is faster than it's ever been before. Ideas are shared faster than they've ever been before, and we are aware of stuff. Like we just find out stuff so quickly.
It's a good point.
So I think fundamentally the answer to your question is that no, nothing's ever been like this before because nothing could have ever been like this before.
That's true. There's a lot of firsts happening right now.
Yeah.
In a lot of different ways.
Yeah. And maybe before we start answering a few other questions, I wanted to read this out loud only because it's so striking. I mean, the fact that this has happened and how it's sort of really uncovered the rot beneath that facade that we've been privileged to be able to accept for so long. But you really see because of the power of so many people witnessing what's happening, be able to document what's happening, that things have changed. So this is the original police report on George Floyd's death. So the title is Man Dies After Medical Incident During Police Interaction. May 25th, 2020, Minneapolis. On Monday evening, shortly after 8 p.m., officers from the Minneapolis Police Department responded to the 3700 block of Chicago Avenue South on report of a forgery in progress. Officers were advised that the suspect was sitting on top of a blue car and appeared to be under the influence. 2 officers arrived and located the suspect. A male believed to be in his 40s in his car. He was ordered to step from his car. After he got out, he physically resisted officers. Officers were able to get the suspect into handcuffs and noted he appeared to be suffering medical distress. Officers called for an ambulance. He was transported to Hennepin County Medical Center by ambulance, where he died a short time later. At no time were weapons of any type used by anyone involved in this incident. The Minnesota Bureau of Criminal Apprehension has been called in to investigate this incident at the request of the Minneapolis Police Department. No officers were injured in the incident. Body-worn cameras were on and activated during this incident.
Yeah. And that doesn't read anything like what the video.
I think it stands on its own. I mean, everybody knows enough about what happened that it's just lies. Like, it's ridiculous how that somebody who knew what was going on could just
write that.
Yes. Anyways, all right. So, should we maybe skip this big question that's related to that and get to a couple of, like a palate cleanser?
Okay, yeah, we can do some quicker ones and then circle back around when we have time. Do some non-political stuff.
Yeah.
Although I guess that breaks it up a little bit more.
Yes, it does.
So there we go. So we have a question from Stay Frosty, and they say, I'm on Battle 27. I want to know, do I need a gold character for that?
The short answer is no. Sufficiently promoted silvers can actually reach and finish bonus Battle 6.
Yeah, so it's probably best to get a gold character after a certain point if you're stalling out and you've got silver characters at a couple promotions and silver packs aren't getting you there.
Yeah.
But you don't strictly need it. And really, that's all it is that if you can't beat something and the pack that you're currently on doesn't do it, you need to either get gold characters or you need to start considering buying gold characters directly or, grinding out as many challenges as you can in a week when it's available and you have the prerequisites for it or something like that. There's really no specific answer at any given point. Because you can beat a lot, with technically a lot lower stuff.
Yeah.
Right? Like, if you have the Ibis stick and somebody with power drain, like, you can go a lot farther with Bronze Nightwing than you should be able to. Yeah. Right?
Oh, this is our classic Ares back row Killer Frost team.
Nice. But if you're having difficulties, it might be best to upgrade to golds.
Yeah. I mean, the short answer is sort of the wrong answer when I say no, too, right? Because what it means is that you need to promote your silvers.
Yeah.
You could augment them, and you need gears. But the people who are struggling finishing Battle 27 probably don't have great gears.
Yeah.
But you could actually get better. To me, it's like Pokemon, because there are times where you might potentially stall out. And you can always get better. And the way the game forces progression is that if your characters just aren't strong enough, you won't get any farther.
Yeah.
Because in the single player mode, it's
very much gated because of the way that specials happen more often when you are losing. You get more specials when you're losing, and you get less specials when you're winning, so it's very much based off of stats.
And so taking that even a step back, it's because more specials when you're getting hit, because you generate power faster when you're hit.
Yeah.
As opposed to hitting in multiplayer where you generate more power. So it forces you, because if you're doing a lot of hitting, you're giving them more power, you're going to be hit by more specials. If they're doing more hitting, then you get the specials, and that's sort of an equalizer.
Yeah, and the fact that enemies have consistent stats instead of having relative stats based off of matchmaking.
Right.
Yeah.
So I guess the answer is that getting the gold will offer you faster progression than sticking with promoting your silvers to get past Battle 27. So the original answer was sort of wrong, but it's because the question was loaded and it had some presuppositions baked in.
Yeah. But there we go. Our next question comes from BMO Gaming, and they say, for your Q&A, what do you think of the use of glitches?
So this is a funny question, right?
Yeah.
Do you think our thinking's changed? I don't think it
I don't think so. What I'm going to say about glitches is I'm generally pro glitch. I think anything that is within the game that you can do without, installing any third-party external software that also does not negatively impact other people's experience and positively impacts your own experience is fine. I think it's cool to test the limits of and stretch the limits of the game. I think it's a whole other way of appreciating and enjoying the game, to understand how it works well enough to sort of slip through the cracks of what the developers intended and what the developers allow. And I think that, as a sort of logic puzzle in and of itself, that's given us actually a lot of enjoyment from this game, right? Is figuring out how glitches work, refine them and all that stuff, I think has been its own way to experience and enjoy the game with its own sort of rewards. Right?
And we can't, we'd be hypocrites if we were against glitches. It's what built this channel.
Yeah.
And people who are coming to us later aren't seeing a lot of glitches because there just aren't very many good ones. But this channel would not exist right now like this.
Yeah.
If it weren't for glitches.
So I think we are pretty glitch positive. And the only time I don't like glitches is when it unfairly distributes ability, I would say. I don't know if that's the exact right word, but when there's an unfair distribution of who gets the benefits from the glitches, and that results in some people having a more negative experience of it. And I think the problem is that if you really, really drill down, it's hard to say that even on the most basic level that some people who've used glitches played more than they would have otherwise and got more faster than they would have otherwise and were able to do more multiplayer than would have otherwise to displace some people that were aware of glitches but weren't using them on principle, right?
Yeah.
So I think, unfortunately, there's probably has been a slight, but on sort of, you can't know exactly how much of a negative impact on some number of players in the Injustice community, right? But I think it has improved the quality of life of many more.
Right.
Yeah, and they've been, I think, with Injustice at least, I haven't seen any glitches at any point where it wasn't well known. I think any issues that we've run into that have been, a small minority of people ruining the game for other people or making things less fun, not necessarily ruining, has been, very obviously hacked. So I think that's how I feel about glitches.
Yeah, because one of the reasons why I think promoting glitches or actually publicizing them is probably a better word, is that it's an equalizer. Because there's going to be a large group of people, when it's something that's built in and that easy to do, people are going to be exploiting it. And this gives everybody who wants it to do it. So it levels the playing field against a small group of people who are probably exploiting it no matter what.
Yeah, and the difference between getting battle points a little faster, I think, is one that I'm okay with putting in some people's hands, especially when that's essentially their payment model too, right? Mm-hmm. It's people who are willing to put in more work instead of more money.
Right.
Yeah, so there we go. Our next question comes from Grav Joshi. I'm not sure if that's how that's pronounced. It's Gaurav and then Joshi. Let us know how that's pronounced in the comments if you want, or don't, and just let us be wrong, or maybe right. And they say, "Hey BDCKR Gaming, I appreciate your level of dedication and consistency for Injustice Gods Among Us. I loved your game-related videos, all glitches, MP teams, gear reviews, and etc., etc. I have learned a lot from your informative podcast, P and Q&A and C&T as well. Now I always look forward to hearing from you guys. Please publish your older seasons in podcast format. Here's my question. Shouldn't I use alternate Google account login in and out method to do the airplane mode glitch because of account bleeding, right? Are there any alternatives to do airplane mode glitch? Because I keep deleting app data, also deletes app packages, which cost 1,469.59 kilobytes of data to download while resetting. So every time I have to do the airplane mode glitch and reset and challenge, it takes more time and data." So, sort of a two-part. The first part for uploading in podcast format. Unfortunately, for us, it just would take so much time to go through a backlog and post them for the number of people that would be listening, which is really low. Obviously you're one, but I don't know how many people who currently listen in the podcast, which are still only like a dozen or so people, would go back and listen to the backlog. This is explicit permission if you want to go through and use some YouTube to MP3 rip thing on any video you want and download it as an MP3 to your device and then listen to it that way, and that would let you listen to it on the go when you're on Wi-Fi. This is also explicit permission for anybody who wants to go to one of our old P&Q and CNAT videos specifically. I don't care. We're not making like ad revenue from those anyways. If you want to download those as MP3,
you sure we're not making
fine.
a few cents a month?
Oh, you know what? That's true. I will swallow that cost for anybody's enjoyment.
So the funny thing is, I think we've still got all the audio files. I never deleted any of them. So we've got those tracks.
The unfortunate reality of it is that it would take us so much longer to do anything else with them. I think the only thing that we might be able to do if we have all the tracks and they're organized is mass upload them to a Google Drive and then link to the Google Drive, potentially.
Well, that's true.
But, so, you know what? If that's not too much work, we might actually consider doing that. But you still need to download them to your device. So that would make it slightly easier, but not, entirely fix the problem.
Right.
But the uploading it to our podcast feed and then absolutely destroying our podcast feed.
Right, because every time you upload it, or can you set it so it doesn't announce it?
I don't know if we can do that on the podcast thing, but we'd have to do tech support for that, and then also upload like hundreds of videos.
Right.
Or not hundreds of videos, hundreds of audio files, and then do the tags for them, and then do the descriptions for them. And it would be quicker for an individual to download an episode from our YouTube and then listen to it on their phone than it would be for us to upload the podcast episode. So unfortunately, for the number of people that listen to our podcast and the even smaller number who would want to go through our backlog, I don't think it's worth it, especially because we explicitly lose monetization when we do that. So not that it matters for us, because the one view is
pennies.
Again, a fraction of a cent. But it would be a lot of work, and we do appreciate anybody who likes us and wants to listen to us enough to do that, but it would be so much time and effort, and we don't have any indication that very many people at all would like it. So unfortunately, that's going to have to be a no. And then for the second part, for the I shouldn't use an alternate Google account logging in and out to do the airplane mode glitch because of account bleeding.
So this is interesting. I've seen this from a number of commenters who are saying that in order to clear app data, they need to re-download more than a gig of data. And I still don't have the problem because I'm still regularly resetting Phantom Zone and the challenge.
Yeah.
And it's really maybe like 100. Or maybe, kilobytes. Never mind. That's kilobytes is only like...
It's a couple megs.
Yeah, that's only... No, so that is what I'm losing. So it's not actually that much. I misread that as megs. So it's not... I don't know that there's another option. That's what we use, but we always do it over Wi-Fi.
Yeah, if you're doing it over data, I think you just have to be a lot more careful with that. I don't know if there's a better method.
Funny story. Neither of us had data on our phones until last year.
It's not so funny as it is just a little sad.
So funny, not haha funny, but I guess. So there were, for the longest time, like for the biggest part, the most productive part of our channel, we had no data. It was all Wi-Fi all the time. And yeah, I guess there isn't an answer. But so this is, I misread this comment in question originally because there are people who are saying that with their newer devices, they can't just clear app data. They're doing a full iOS. They're basically deleting, uninstalling and reinstalling for the amount of data that they need to take. So I don't know if there's anything to make with that, but for now we're still good.
Yeah. So there we go. Getting back to the political stuff again, we've got a long question from, or a long, I guess, comment. I don't know how many questions there are here.
From Stephen Robie. So I do want to point out that there was, this was only the first comment. There was a bit of a thread. There was a sort of a minor conflict, and then there was a resolution. They ended up sort of agreeing in principle.
Yeah.
But I want to address some of the points because a lot of times I think people don't read the whole thread. They might read the first comment.
Yeah, and obviously this is not, nobody ever goes after the people that we talk about in these comments, but we want to have like an actual open, like proper discussion here.
Mm-hmm.
So we're not representing this as anybody's final viewpoint, right, or what they ended up on, but that is good to note at the top.
And it's but the reason why I think it's a useful comment is because it illustrates a lot of the other kinds of responses that we're seeing that I think are worth responding to.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So it starts out, a lot of people seem to be saying, I'm not saying rioting violence are okay. I'm not saying they're okay.
Well, air quotes.
Wink. Yeah. If rioting means burning tree branches in the middle of the street, I could care less. But if it means destruction of local businesses, looting, and worse, people being murdered like David Dorn, I'll never support that.
So David Dorn was the black police officer, I think, maybe Baltimore. I can't always keep the American places straight.
Yeah.
Who was killed trying to defend somebody's business.
Yeah. Are you supporting that rioting? You seem to be saying that. And do you want to...
Well, all right, so I think maybe you said something to the point where you understand, or did you... I can't even remember if you said you supported it. But I think there's a difference between, because I know I definitely didn't say that. I think
the way that I framed it was, I think it is to some extent necessary right now for them doing what they need to be doing. I think the way that it's happening, the problem is there's so many layers to come at it, right? Mm-hmm. This is a really sort of nuanced thing that's happening right now, where I think one of the layers that you can come at it is saying, that because the police are instigating most stuff, right, most violent conflict, because the way that the scale of violence happening on either side is totally disproportionate, right? Mm-hmm. That even if you don't support rioting, it seems like you would almost have to say, I really, really, really don't support what the police are doing, right. But I don't think meeting violence with violence is the answer, right? And anybody who says, I don't support this rioting, and doesn't mention the police violence that is in like almost every case instigating it, and even if you find some outlier where the police aren't actually the primary instigators of the violence, and it is civilians who are doing it first, right. The police are always responding entirely disproportionately. So it almost feels to me hard to have that conversation, and I know it is sometimes being had in good faith, right? Stephen here obviously changed his opinion, or at least if he didn't change his opinion, was able to agree with sort of a more nuanced opinion, right?
Yeah, because I think I'll restate a point that I made last week, right? That it's that of all the different things that have been discussed, I think the part where we come to talk about rioting, that's the one place where reasonable people can disagree.
Yeah.
Right? And I said exactly that last week. Reasonable people can disagree about the rioting. But the rest of it, all the things that have led to this point, to these protests, to this awakening, I think most reasonable people who aren't racist can agree up to that point of the potentially violent response.
Yeah. And so it's just when you take a step back and you look at the situation, it feels irresponsible for anybody to say, okay, I support all the protesting, I don't support the riots, and not talk at least as much about what the police are doing. You know what I mean?
Right.
And I'm not trying to make the argument that because what one people are doing is bad, it doesn't make what the other people are doing not, right? I don't think for anybody who has the same issue with violence, period, I think it is fair to have issues with the rioting, right? But I think whenever anybody brings up one half and not the other, I sort of just want to scream where I'm like, it just feels like we're missing so much of what's going on. It feels like the vast majority of the violence is being skimmed over to blame civilians again instead of police, which is always what happens. It's always on the side of the police and not civilians.
If you look at both sides, if we split into sides where we're talking about, on one side you've got police and their supporters, and the other side you've got the protesters and the supporters.
Yeah.
That dialogue is happening where when you look at rioters, you are judging the worst elements of the protesters for the entire protest.
Yeah.
But on the other side, why isn't it that you judge the entire police force for the worst parts of them?
Yeah.
Right? If you're going to be...
in the entire police force for the worst parts of them, which is a much higher proportionate part of the police.
Right, because they are actively supporting the worst elements, right? Like if you don't specifically support special investigations to weed out the incompetent police or the actively evil, I think, then you're complicit.
So, moving back to the comment, so you seem to be saying that, like, are you supporting that rioting? Saying if you push people long enough, this is what you get, which is essentially terrorism, which is defined as destruction of property and violence. For social or political objectives.
And so I think it's missing a point though, right? Because it's typically terrorism is violence. It's trying to instill fear, but destruction of property is not the same thing as life.
Yeah.
And that's one of those kind of false equivalences that are implied, where people talk about how, oh, this is such a big deal that they're doing all this property damage. Yeah, you know, if we're going to rank stuff on a hierarchy and prioritize stuff, I prioritize life over property.
And the other thing about it is that it's when I said if you push people long enough, this is what you get. I don't think it needs to be an implicit endorsement of what's happening for it to be a statement of fact. Mm-hmm. And I think also, you know, to some extent, I still, or not to some extent, I should say, I still do stand by that, because I think everybody has situations where bad things happen to people you love. And you understand that retribution is not necessarily the answer. But I think also collectively we understand that there's a certain amount that's justified, right?
You understand the motivation.
Yeah, not even understand the motivation. I think, you know, when people have a family member killed, right, in a violent act, and they push really, really hard to get the person who killed them put away for a long time. Or if something really terrible happens to a family member, and then people, you know, go out and do everything in their power to try to either enact judgment or ensure that thing doesn't happen again, right? Mm-hmm. And when people are just doing it indiscriminately, when somebody says, oh, you did this to, you know, my family member, now I'm going to kill you, right? Mm-hmm. I don't support that. I still don't. Mm-hmm. But what this feels like to me is people being a group of people, right? A collection of people who have, you know, close ties to each other due to necessity, right? Mm-hmm. They need to sort of...
Shared experience.
Yeah, shared experience. Have had terrible, terrible things happening to people close to them for as long as they can remember and as long as anybody in their lives can remember, right?
Generations.
Yeah, for generations. Generational violence. And they are trying to stop that from happening again. They're trying to reduce that pain and suffering from continuing to, you know, ruin lives over and over and over again, and ruin lives of people they know. And they have, in a very slow way, right? And this is in like years and years time scale, ramped up how strongly they're responding, right? Mm-hmm. And then, you know, they've continued to not be responded to, not be responded to, not be responded to. And this is the answer. A lot of time, when you look at what terrorism is, right? It is a buildup of somebody who usually hasn't taken a lot of actions before, all at once going straight into violence, right? And really, really terrible violence. And it's not to make things better. That's not the goal, right? They have a sort of lofty internal sense of what a perfect world is, but the actual act that they are taking in no way contributes to getting their goals accomplished, right? And that's not what's happening here,
right?
And so I think it's a really unfair comparison,
right? Like
a really deeply unfair comparison.
It's missing something.
What's
that
happening
comparison
here to terrorism
is missing a little bit of the insight to understanding where people are coming from. Yeah.
And I think that's probably the best way I can address that.
Right.
Give or take.
Right.
Yeah. So then the next one, they say, I'm paraphrasing, but please look it up. I'm sorry, but murder, terrorism, I consider none of them to be justified under any circumstances. People mentioned the Boston Tea Party, which was destruction of the property of the oppressive government, the very property, the taxes of which were the source of the problem. These riots are causing damage to local black-owned businesses who did nothing wrong in the first place, sacrificing black lives and livelihoods for the sake of protecting black lives. That's a problem, and any good science layman knows that a single instance or string of instances are not sufficient evidence of anything.
So here's one thing I want to point out. I mean, I'm not necessarily... I'm going to disagree with the point, but this is not the other point I'm making, because there's actually a lot of businesses that aren't black-owned. I mean, I saw a really good rant about how the Target in the area, it's not their Target. It's a big corporation.
Yeah.
But the point is that single instances actually are considered evidence. There's different levels of it. There's a hierarchy of evidence. You start off with the lowest level, which is expert opinion. Then you've got case reports, which are single instances. Then you've got observational studies, which are a string
collections
of
single instances.
Yeah, a string of instances, if we're going to use Stephen's language. And then you have controlled studies, and then randomized controlled studies, and then systematic review of all the studies. So in science, you always work with the best evidence that you have.
Yeah.
And the best evidence that we have right now is these instances. That's what we've got.
Yeah.
Which is better than what we had before we had so many cameras everywhere.
Yeah. And obviously, we're not supporting, damages to local businesses that, because even if it's not a black-owned business, right? If there's just a random civilian's local business that's being damaged or destroyed, right, who is not, in any direct way. Well, no, you could say if they're not black, then they have been probably in some sense complicit, whether intentionally or unintentionally. I'm saying even past that, who has been not actively oppressing anyone, right? I don't think they deserve to have their business burned down, their livelihoods destroyed, obviously. And that is, again, even within the rioting, you talk about a massive number of people protesting, and then a minority of people rioting, and then a minority within that of people who are, causing property damage to local businesses. And then within that, you also start getting really murky on who's actually doing it, right? And I think it is fair, and there is criticisms to be made of some of what is happening in terms of damage. And there are also a lot of black voices who are speaking out about that stuff, right? There are videos of people going hey, you don't riot and do this stuff in my neighborhood. And you also see a lot of the people there that are actually doing the rioting and, breaking stuff are not black, right? And, you can't look inside their souls and see why they're there and the reason why they're doing the things that they're doing. But I think there's a good point to be made that, yeah, there are elements of it that are not positive. And so if you're talking about black-owned businesses or even just civilian-owned businesses who aren't actively, who aren't racist, right, being destroyed, there's a lot of people who, even if they were unintentionally complicit because they haven't been forced to examine their privilege or haven't examined it appropriately when they were given opportunities to, they still don't deserve their businesses burned down or destroyed. And I don't...
Proportional. We talked about last week, right?
Yeah.
Proportional response.
And again, it's really hard because you're right, I don't agree with that. But when you characterize it as that's the thing that's happening, it's not really the thing that's happening, right? There's been isolated incidents, and we might never figure out what the actual specific actors were involved in, but there has been elements within people rioting who have done damage to things that should not have been damaged.
And those are the margins.
Yeah.
And the big part of it is not that.
Yeah.
Right.
So totally. It's hard. You're right. I definitely don't support that happening. I don't know. I'm not saying it's not worth talking about, because if it's happening at all, that's worth talking about, right? I'm not trying to be when people talk about how the 1 in 5 rape statistic or sexual assault statistic is overblown. I'm not saying that there's an acceptable number of black-owned businesses or civilian-owned businesses being burned down, people's livelihoods being destroyed. That isn't worth talking about. I'm just saying I don't think it's fair to characterize that as the whole thing that's going on.
Right.
Yeah. And so then we talked about the evidence thing too. Next part of the comment is, I could put together a book of all the cases of people smoking their whole lives and never having health complications directly related to it, and it would spin a solid narrative that smoking doesn't lead to any health problems.
And Stephen could, but then Stephen would be ignoring all the higher levels of evidence that actually are available. Yeah. Right? So the mistake here is a lack of scientific literacy, because if what happens is you see an argument, somebody who maybe doesn't follow exactly what's going on, seizing the argument, well, observational studies aren't good enough in one situation, that means they're also not good enough in this other situation. That's not true. If the observational studies are the best thing that we've got, then you work with that. Yeah. But if you've got more evidence that stuff actually happens, and here's the other thing too, if you want to prove, because I think maybe only a third of people who smoke will develop the complications of smoking, whether it's lung cancer or COPD. Yeah. A lot of people get away with it without any obvious big disease consequence.
Yeah.
But to say something doesn't happen is a harder thing to prove than to say something does happen. Because when you say something does happen, all you need is one instance. When you say something doesn't happen, you need a lot of instances where it doesn't happen. You need it to be consistent across the board. So, yeah, it's the same thing to me as far as the idea of scientific literacy goes. So,
and so then to finish up the comment, I'm not saying that racist cops don't exist. Of course they do. Prejudice exists in all groups of sufficient size, and prejudice against all groups. I'm saying that if you don't look holistically, you don't get a sense of the nature of the problem or true scale of the problem. If it's bigger or smaller than others, it is in line with other problems. Only cases against African Americans is ever publicized and can give the appearance of a major racism problem. But if we saw all cases of police brutality, we may discover it's a case of lack of concern over welfare of anyone they view as criminals, regardless of race.
Okay, and so here's the thing. So who they view as criminal, what we're seeing is that the lack of concern is broad and pervasive, and that the people they view as subhuman are the marginalized groups of people. So I think the statement by itself is true, but it's too broad to actually show you what's happening. Is that the people that are viewed as criminals are black, they are people with mental illness, they are the people who are exploited and hurt are women.
Yeah.
It's marginalized people, and we can't get away from that by saying, well, they just treat some people, they only treat the people that they consider criminals badly. It's the people that they're picking to think of as criminals.
Yeah.
That's the problem.
And you can also have non-racist cops, but not anti-racist cops in a racist system. And you can have cops that are, again, not explicitly racist, but exist in a racist society and have, a history of environmental conditions that cause just a million different... There's so many things, right? It's really... You can never reduce any of this to a really small list of concerns. And I think the important point at the end of the day is that when you do actually look at the statistics, right, when you do take the overall view of it, when we have good information about rates of crime being committed versus rates of conviction, rates of being arrested versus conviction, right, versus charges versus conviction, we do consistently see a pattern where black people are disproportionately affected by police, not by the amount that they commit crimes.
Yeah, and I want to say that police are a very special situation, right? Because what we're not doing is playing into that sort of joke that you criticize people for participating in a system that is flawed. That's not what we're doing. But when you have police officers who you want to say are otherwise good, they're not just participating in the system, which you're forced to do if you want to live. What they're doing is they're enforcing the system, which is a different type of participation.
Yeah.
So if you are there, not just
it's opt-in, it's not opt-out.
Right.
And in a lot of cases, the systems that you shouldn't criticize people for systems that they are not allowed to opt out of. This was an opt-in, right? They signed up and they can do other things with their lives.
Yep.
Yeah. So they say, we just don't know until we look at the whole thing and not just a series of anecdotes.
Have we addressed this? I mean, we're talking about 400 years worth of anecdotes, right?
Yeah.
So,
and we're also talking about science.
Yes.
And the science has largely fallen on the side of, yes, there is racial bias.
Yes.
And it's hard, because it's not experimental science, because you can't, well, some of it is. There are some experiments that do show racial bias.
Yes.
Actually, like a not insignificant number of them that show racial bias.
Yeah.
But, data crunching, direct sort of experimentation, and anecdotes, and they all combine together in a way that, every level shows a bias against minorities. Right? And so when you put it all together, you have a lot of levels all saying the exact same thing, with very little, if any, room for argument within the anecdotes.
Right.
Or within the evidence at that level, I should say. And then they finish up with, anyways, I'm a fan of you guys, and I look forward to more videos from you.
Thank you.
There we go.
So, listen, we appreciate the comment, and I want to make sure I say again what you started off with, is that what we're not doing is picking on this particular comment, but it was just like a lot of our other Q&As. It's a taking off point, because I think it brings together a lot of the ideas that we see talked about other places.
Yeah.
And it's an easy way to sort of address some of the counterpoints.
And for all the stuff that we disagree with, and for the fact that we disagree with, I think, the overall message a lot, there are a lot of points within it that, we do agree with. It's just what you sort of do with that information for the next step, right? Yeah. Saying that, like, some of this stuff is bad. I do support protesting, right? A lot of the core is there. We just think that the perspective that's been taken on it it's not the conclusion that we come to.
Yeah, that's just we disagree with. That's all.
Yeah,
so I think we're trying to be respectful. I think. Yeah.
So that's all of our questions. We're way over time. This is one of our longest podcast episodes ever.
And the ironic thing is, because of our topic matter, it's not going to be monetizable, and it will give us nothing. But it was still
because of our giveaway. The cost of creating this episode was 1 month's worth of YouTube ad revenue, and the funds we're going to get from it is like 20 cents.
Yeah, you know what? Totally worth it.
There we go. Email us, enter our giveaway. We would love to give you some free games. And by you, we mean some of you.
9 of you.
9 of you, yeah. To finish up, shout out to Eliza Black Lives Matter Caton. She thinks Black Lives Matter because Black Lives Matter. This shout out has been brought to you by people who just want to be treated fairly and aren't actually asking for very much when you think about it. We'd also like to give a huge thank you to everybody supporting us on Patreon.
That's Consul Peasant and Edwoon at the Last Word tier, Mohammed Albshaiti at the Your Message Here tier, Shawn Farrell, Daniel Simonson, Aaron Maule, Michael DeVries, Brandon C., and Irvin Ruiz, who support us on the credited level, and Chris Wolf, Scarlet NB, and Awesome Gamer 241 at the gratitude level.
There we go. Thanks so much for your support, and we'll see you guys next time.
Komoda.